My friends, what a debacle! Within a week, it was over. Before? After.
We are winning!
Just because some pipelines started speaking Russian, this one will be epic, one for the history books. Those are the men that achieved this stunning victory. Engineers, coal miners, whose faces are covered in soot and dirt after days of digging. They're literally the architects of this Russian victory, the OG pipe stretchers.
Again!
A couple days ago, Ukrainian newspaper The Kyiv Independent wrote, Northern Operational Command Chief dismissed for unclear reasons. I think you and I and everybody here knows exactly why.
No! Our men flee the battlefield! Leave me alone!
So what exactly happened? As the Ukrainian salient in Kursk Oblast was under heavy pressure, early in the morning of March 8, the Ukrainian command woke up with something painful sticking out in their rear. That's when entire Russian rifle squads emerged just outside Sudzha, and were now spreading behind enemy lines as if someone had used a cheat code adding entire units with simple clicks on the map. Followed a debacle, complete chaos. Entire Ukrainian units fled by foot and just headed for the border. So in this video we will go through a step-by-step analysis of this Russian offensive. That way you will understand exactly what happened and how they did it. Welcome to History Legends, and here are the latest news of the Russo-Ukrainian war. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, some of my videos have been targeted with limited or no ads. So make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has already helped, and welcome to the headquarters.
Как бы это непреодолимо, в этом есть свой кайф. Безусловно, причем. Значит, потом будет что детям рассказать. Конечно.
Do you even remember why Ukraine is in Russia? If not, it's okay, let's start with a quick summary. On the 6th of August 2024, Ukrainian forces invaded Russian territory. They expanded quickly until eventually the Russian armed forces stopped them and counterattacked. Followed a grinding battle. This was the frontline situation in Kursk Oblast by October 1st, then again by the 1st of January, and then by early February. As you can see, the Ukrainian salient kept shrinking. But that doesn't mean that the Ukrainians were ready to just give it up. As a matter of fact, they had heavily fortified Sudzha, the city sitting at the center of their defensive perimeter. But in the past few weeks, events accelerated. On the 7th of February, Ukraine pushed 3.4 kilometers towards Ulanok. The NAFO community squealed with joy. The 69th Reddit Cornflakes Brigade was about to storm the city of Kursk.
Hello, wake up.
In response, 2 days later, on the 9th of February, the Russians launched their own offensive on the west flank of the salient, where they captured half the village of Sverdlikava, which they mopped up on the 19th. A couple days later, the Ukrainians launched a mechanized counterattack to reclaim the village. And honestly, we got some splendid footage from this assault. Here, Russian drones spotted 3 Ukrainian BMPs driving at full speed across fields. Soon, these were chased down by fiber optics drones. And while flying in this entire area, the Russian drone spotted yet another group of Ukrainians. 3 BMPs in attack formation with all the infantry. And this is where I have to stop. Is it me, or this frame looks exactly like something out of World War II? As a result of the loss of vehicles, entire Ukrainian fire teams had to reach Sverdlikava by foot. Shortly after, the Ukrainian Quick Reaction Force was scattered by another wave of drones, like this T-64 BV tank that was targeted and then immobilized. On the 26th of February, the Russian 9th Motor Rifle Regiment stormed Pabrepki at the northern tip of the salient. After a quick firefight, they officially captured the village. And my friends, the rumors were true. Because later in the day, the Russians raised Saruman's flag, the white hand of Isengard, on Pabrepki. Overall, throughout February, the Russians were already putting a lot of pressure on the Ukrainian salient. It was also reported that Ukraine's elite 82nd Air Assault Brigade was withdrawn some time ago to refit at the rear. As a result, you will see how a number of Ukrainian forces present in the Kursk salient were part of territorial defense brigades, which are known to be of a lesser quality than regular formations. I guess it's a Ukrainian tradition to get clapped during a rotation of forces. March 2025. On March 1st, the Russian command launched a surprise attack on Ukraine's left flank. That's how Russian assault detachments rammed the Ukrainians back to the border and regained control of the entire Snagost River area. In the process, Russian drones swarmed some of the Ukrainian forces which tried to escape. 24 hours later, the Russians mopped up the area surrounding the farm village of Pabrepki. That's when they raised the white-blue-red flag on the hamlet of Novaya Sarochina. Shortly after this firefight, a group of about 6 Ukrainian soldiers hiding in the woods was captured. Meanwhile, south of Sudzha, Russian aviation was softening Ukrainian positions across the Psiel River near Gueva. Here an FAB-3000 was dropped on a factory overlooking the settlement. And in this frame you can see the results of the airstrike. Talking about airstrikes, par hasard, this Ukrainian drone recorded the exact moment where an FAB glide bomb fell on a nearby village and captured the entire destruction that followed. By the 3rd of March, the Russians attacked along the entire northern part of the salient, forcing the Ukrainian defenders to withdraw 2 kilometers. The only remaining defensive node in the northern sector for Ukraine was Malaya Lokhnia, located 4.5 kilometers south of Pabrepki. In preparation for the next assault, Russian drone operators started clearing the way up to this village. They were supported by Russian aviation, which also dropped a load that they kept for a couple days, a massive FAB-3000 that they released in some woods north of Malaya Lokhnia. As some Russian forces advanced north of the village, another detachment attacked eastwards from Leonidova towards Nikolsky, located 2 kilometers south of Malaya Lokhnia. There was Ukraine's infamous 47th Mechanized Brigade that held the ground, and they seemed to have done a pretty good job. During one of these mechanized assaults, the Russians reportedly lost 4 BMPs and 1 BTR. However, by the 4th of March, the Russian 106 Guards Airborne Division dialed up the pressure on Malaya Lokhnia, and defending the settlement became extremely difficult since all the reinforcements were getting intercepted. At the same time, Russian airborne troops attacked from Sverdlikava towards the neighboring village of Lebedivka. In this footage, you can see the work of Russian sappers clearing out the place house by house. Eventually, men of the 51st Airborne Regiment raised their banners, one for the Russian Federation and one of the VBV at the center of Lebedivka. The 5th of March, the Sudzha cauldron. On the 5th of March, the Russian command launched an attack 11 kilometers behind Sudzha, between Zhuravka and Novenke. At the same time, with extreme synchronicity, Russian assault detachments from the 177th Guards Marine Regiment from the Caspian Flotilla, departed from Pliechava and managed to infiltrate Ukrainian lines. They crossed the Psiel River and consolidated a bridgehead inside these woods. Supposedly, this attack was launched by North Korean troops, but in reality, we have zero proof of their involvement. At this rate, I think the Ukrainians will blame all their problems on the North Koreans. Corruption, North Koreans! As you can see in this video, the river is not very wide. In that case, it seems Russian forces managed to build pontoons relatively quickly and bring a number of vehicles across the river, some of which were intercepted by Ukrainian drones. In total, on the 5th of March, the Russians gained 4 kilometers of ground and then another 3 kilometers the following day. This pincer maneuver was an operational master plan. It was brilliant. Everything started when the Russians attacked the northern part of the salient, pinning down as many Ukrainian forces far from Sudzha, and draw enemy reinforcements in this direction. Then they struck on both flanks simultaneously. The southern pincer had cut off the secondary supply route linking Sudzha to Miropilia, whereas the northern pincer was extremely close to Ukraine's main supply route linking Sudzha to Sumy. Following this double penetration, the Telegraph reported 10,000 Ukrainian troops at risk of encirclement. As a matter of fact, this entire Ukrainian grouping survived only because of this last remaining supply route. Now, this forest was the key for this large-scale maneuver. The objective was clear: storm the forest, and from there, both pincers would head towards Yunakivka. After that, it was finito basta for the Ukrainian force to ensure the defenders give up their positions in that forest. Russian aviation covered it with numerous guided aerial bombs, while drones hunted down Ukrainian support units like this mortar team. Due to the critical nature of this Russian attack, the Ukrainians gathered a Kampfgruppe in Miropolya and planned for them to advance towards Gornal and then counterattack from the south. However, Russian recon drones spotted the enemy pontoon bridge and called in artillery. That's how 152mm D-20 howitzers used Krasnopol rounds to destroy the bridge linking the two settlements. Then came the drones that mopped up the area and destroyed 2 additional vehicles in the same sector during the night. By the 7th of March, the assaulted detachments in the northern pincer continued their attacks between Zhuravka and Novenke. Some of the forward elements even reached the village of Basivka, located only 2,500 meters away from Ukraine's main supply line. One more thrust and they reached Ukraine's point of gravity. If that happened, the entire Ukrainian battle group would have been encircled. However, drone operators of the Ukrainian 116th Territorial Defense Brigade reacted quickly and pinned down the attacking force. We don't have visual evidence, but we can also be certain that the Ukrainians heavily bombarded this entire area, followed by counterattacks by infantry and mechanized units. It was vital for the survival of the entire battle group. Further south, the Russian Marines from the Caspian Flotilla made some more gains towards Gueva, but overall the surprise effect had faded. The Ukrainian command managed to blockade the exits of the breachhead in the south and plug the breach in the north. You have to understand that the Ukrainian army came that close from a complete military disaster, like Debaltseve in 2015. In my opinion, such a defeat could have very well ended the war for Ukraine. While all this was taking place, the Russian command also launched offensive operations on the western side of Ukraine's defensive perimeter. In this video, Russian MRLS systems struck the farm hamlet of Loknia, which now sat right on the contact line. If this position fell, the Russians could cut off the entire salient in two, another crisis for the Ukrainian command to deal with. That's how on the 7th of March, Russian assault detachments from the 9th, 22nd and 30th Motorized Rifle Regiments closed in on Malaya Loknia. Here you can see men of the 22nd Motor Rifle Regiment raising their banner on the village of Staraya Sarochina. There was no real battle. Once the attack force arrived, the defenders quickly scattered. The ones that were lucky jumped on their vehicles and drove off, although some of them got intercepted by enemy drones. To prevent a complete collapse in Malaya Loknia, operators of Ukraine's 4th Ranger Regiment were pulled up and launched a rapid counterattack supported by BMP-2 in the hamlet of Nikolsky. Soon enough, the entire village of Malaya Loknia was in the gray zone as drones buzzed over the heads of the defenders. Also, what's terrifying in this war is that as an infantryman, you don't know if the drones buzzing over your head are friendly or hostile. So I've been told that more often than not, they consider every drone they see hostile and just shoot at them. Overall, by the end of the 7th of March, the situation was definitely critical for the Ukrainians in the Kursk salient, but not quite desperate either. The 8th of March, Operazione Truba, Operation Pipeline. Sometime this winter, Russian intelligence officers remembered that they were sitting on top of an underground pipeline that was used to supply gas from Russia to Europe. Some former Wagner commander thought that maybe they could do something with it, especially since the pipeline stopped operating on the 1st of January 2025. The first problem was that soldiers would have to walk inside this pipeline for 15 kilometers. That was the distance between Russian positions and Sudzha. Nothing like that had ever been attempted before. The sewage pipe that was used in Avdiivka to infiltrate enemy lines was only 2,000 meters long. Now we're talking about 15,000 meters. That's not even the worst part. Although out of operation, the pipeline was still filled with fumes from the remains of liquefied gas. So the soldiers would need something to breathe in oxygen during this entire time. So the lack of oxygen would also play an important role. The pathway was also extremely narrow. We're talking about 140 centimeters in diameter, or 4 feet 7 inches in freedom units. Unless you have an army of dwarves, it's gonna get complicated. This means soldiers would have to stoop, walk with their heads low, or just crawl through this pipeline. The entire plan was just crazy. The engineers that were consulted literally said it was mission impossible. So the Russian commander said, "Давайте за работу, парни! Let's get to work, guys!" It seems impossible is not Russian. The Russian army staff from Battle Group Kursk assembled a unique assault detachment composed of volunteers from various units, namely the 60th Assault Brigade veterans from PMC Redut, the Vostok Brigade, the 30th Motor Rifle Regiment, the 11th Airborne Brigade, and the Aida Spetsnaz group from Akhmat. Honestly, most of them didn't even know what they had signed up for.
What, we some kind of suicide squad?
Fun fact, this Veterans Brigade is composed of veterans of the former Wagner PMC. As you can see with their logo, they're labeled as Putin loyalists since they refused to participate in Prigozhin's uprising. Surprise, surprise, they also happen to be the ones behind the Avdiivka pipeline operation.
Hurrah!
In the days preceding the operation, Russian aircraft cleared the area from which the troops would exit using FAB bombs. The only thing left to do was to send the men forward. Deep down, many felt that they were going to their death. One of them told his relatives, "There may be no connection for a while. We may be going on a one-way trip right now." Despite fear of the unknown, they entered this forgotten pipeline, carrying ammunition and all the supplies necessary. Covered in sweat and dirt, inch by inch, they walked and crawled along this narrow path where it was impossible to pass each other. It was a big gamble. You had hundreds of men back to back. If one man collapsed, technically the entire operation could be ruined. Here you can see how low they had to stoop to be able to pass through. Although we have evidence that some of the soldiers had oxygen masks, they had no other choice but to remove them during breaks in order to be able to drink water and eat food. By doing so, they definitely undermined their health. The worst was that they had to linger inside the pipeline for many hours, some claim even days, waiting for the command for the general assault. They still remained cheerful and motivated enough to wish their loved ones a happy Women's Day.
Мы любим вас. Солнце, с 8 марта тебя. Тебя тоже как кися.
С 8 марта.
Alright, so that was the legend. Reality was a bit different. First of all, the man behind this operation was call sign Zombie, a former commander of the Wagner PMC. If you're interested, I made a video about his story, link in the description. Commander Zombie said that the first thing they did was to pump out the gas from the pipeline and using compressors replace it with oxygen. It was a very complex process. Then when there was enough oxygen, engineers entered the pipeline and started clearing it. All along the way, they started carving in underground bunkers right inside the pipeline. Those were called accumulation points for personnel to rest. They also built in storage areas for water, supplies, and ammunition. They even built in toilets, since soldiers were expected to stay there for a number of days. I mean, you can't let the place look like New Delhi. Once again, it was the shovel that was the primary weapon of the Russian soldier. In this footage, you can see some of the men that had to clear up the entire pipeline, their faces covered in soot and dirt, joking that the operation will fail. They knew that technically at any moment the entire structure could collapse. But they just laughed about it and carried on their mission. On top of the extra oxygen, engineers created their own ventilation system by drilling holes wherever possible in order to allow air to flow within the pipeline. As for logistics, small carts were used to facilitate the transportation and delivery of essentials. In this picture, you can see the troops pulling wheelbarrows filled with various supplies. The construction workers were given these sensors to detect the quantity of gas, but even if it beeped, it seems that they didn't care. Overall, it took 3 weeks to complete this infrastructure. It was reported that some of the first engineers collapsed, overwhelmed by the amount of gas they had breathed in. Others got some nasty burns when the gas flamed up. Yet they were swiftly extracted and essentially revived at the hospital. After which they demanded to return into the pipeline to continue their mission.
Страшно, до сих пор страшно.
To me, it seems that many of these engineers must have been former coal miners, which are very numerous in the Donbass. They even nicknamed their unit the Mining Infiltration Lightning Force. To them, all this was literally a child's play. It was fun and they were excited to continue this special operation.
Как бы это непреодолимо, в этом есть свой кайф. Безусловно, причем. То есть потом будет что детям рассказать? Конечно.
Это самый вкусный обед. Это лучшая работа в мире.
After the construction work was done, the first combat troops entered with all the weapons and military equipment. To avoid detection, the soldiers moved into the pipeline in groups of 5, maintaining a distance of about 2 meters from each other to breathe more comfortably. One of them said that the first 72 hours were the toughest, We consumed a lot of painkillers, my lungs burned, and I had a splitting headache. The attack force moved in the pipeline in small groups spread across 4 days and concentrated in these assembly areas. Because of the large number of people, it became hard for everyone to breathe. But despite these hardships, everybody stayed put. So when Ukrainian news or Twitter claimed that everyone inside the pipeline died because of the gases, we now have the confirmation that this was complete BS. I think the entry point of the pipeline was near Bolshoye Sadatskoye, since it's 15 kilometers away from Sudzha. History will tell, but in my opinion, the Russians could have used these woods and buildings as camouflage to concentrate all the forces and equipment necessary for this operation. It's very likely that Ukrainian drones noticed this increased activity in that sector, but probably thought it was in preparation for another attack towards Martinovka. The men that composed this attack force sat in these tunnels for days. The lack of ventilation made it very difficult to breathe. The world above was unaware of their presence. Eventually came D-Day. A first group of 300 men advanced to the attack position. As you can see in this frame, some of them were even wearing blue armbands to confuse the defenders. And as a matter of fact, Ukrainian special forces did the exact same thing wearing red armbands when they first entered Kursk Oblast.
До штурма осталось часа 3. Работа продолжается.
The first wave consisted of men of the 30th Motor Rifle Brigade and some special forces from the Akhmat contingent. Like a modern Trojan horse, when it was still night, they burst out of the pipeline, emerged behind enemy lines, and dispersed for a 360 defense. In this Ukrainian drone footage, we can actually see a sabotage group of about 20 men the moment they exited the gas pipeline. Most likely these guys were part of the rear of the column when fighting had already erupted and Ukrainian drones started buzzing in the air. As you can see in all these drone footages, there were definitely some casualties in the attack force, but we definitely cannot say that they were all wiped out, or that the Ukrainians knew about the plan and ambushed the attack force the moment they exited the pipeline. Once again, debunking another pro-Ukrainian myth from Twitter. It was all fake news. The other cope was that only 100 out of the 800 men attack force survived. There's literally zero proof of this claim. Now what's interesting is that this video was geolocated 4 kilometers away from the Sudzha city center. Now we know that it was from this exact tree line that the Sturm detachment emerged. Throughout the day, another 500 men exited the pipeline and reinforced the assault detachment. According to the reports, for the Ukrainians holding this sector, surprise was total. Can you imagine you're sitting 15 kilometers away from the contact line and all of a sudden you're surrounded by enemy forces? So the Ukrainian soldiers panicked and many vital defensive positions around Sudzha were just abandoned. As per Wagner PMC doctrine, the commanders carefully monitored the progression of the pipeline operation on big screens and immediately ordered their troops to push forward at all costs. Some rifle squads of the Russian tunnel attack force pushed south and took hold of the industrial area on the eastern outskirts of Sudzha. At the end of the day, this Russian battalion-sized special operations unit took hold of a 3-kilometer wide interdiction zone, right at the heart of Ukraine's defensive perimeter.
They now control a key position, my lord!
From their new positions, these Russian soldiers also guided friendly drones to take out a number of armored vehicles, like the Striker APC that was knocked out. As usual, key communication nodes were identified and destroyed, thus adding to the disorganization in the Ukrainian ranks. Other elements managed to enter the village of Zamostye, creating a small cauldron in the Karmakov-Makhnovka area. Overall, if the Ukrainians were holding up the front pretty well up until that point, the appearance of hundreds of Russian soldiers in their rear cut them pants down and brought chaos into the lower ranks of the Ukrainian grouping. Without even telling their superiors, the soldiers just grabbed their equipment and got the F out of there. The news spread like wildfire. The order of the day was "Rokitsuki, everybody fall back!" Entire units started fleeing towards the border. And it's only then that the Ukrainian command understood the disaster that had just happened. If we put the pieces of the puzzle together, we can see that Operation Pipeline was part of the greater battle plan. First, attack in the north to draw all Ukrainian reserves. Then, attack on the flanks in order to cut off the supply lines of the Ukrainian grouping. And step number 3, Operation Pipeline in order to take control of Sudzha. This would have effectively paralyzed the entire Ukrainian battle group in Kursk Oblast. There's no way they could have retreated and thousands of soldiers would have been captured with all their equipment. I repeat, such a defeat could have ended the war for Ukraine. While the pipe stretchers were doing their thing, on the 8th of March, the Russian command carried on all its offensive operations around the Kursk salient. From Lebedivka, detachments of the 51st Airborne Regiment pushed towards Kazakia Loknia. Their Russian assault units advanced quickly aboard their BMDs. The remaining Ukrainian units in Lebedivka only fought a rearguard battle and were soon in full retreat. They tried to withdraw with all their equipment and guns, but under enemy fire, this was a complicated task. The footage here shows the moment when Ukrainian troops abandoned a howitzer while fleeing the settlement of Kazakia Loknia, which by the way was a couple kilometers away from the contact line. But it gives you an idea of the sense and feeling of panic that must have been running through Ukrainian ranks. Simultaneously, the 137th Guards Airborne Regiment pushed towards the farmstead of Loknia. Once again, the Ukrainian defenders fired a couple rounds and fled.
Our men flee the battlefield! They flee!
Further north in Malaya Loknia, against the odds, the Ukrainians managed to hold their ground. But with the crumbling situation to the left and to the right, there were not many options that remained. Either flee or be surrounded and destroyed. On the eastern flank, numerous FABs fell on Cherkasskoye Parechnoye, obliterating the only buildings that could have been used for the defense of the settlement. Only sporadic fighting was taking place there. Eventually, Russian troops of the 30th Motor Rifle Regiment waved their flags by the church, marking the full capture of the village. Additionally, 4 kilometers away across the fields, Russian forces stormed the village of Martinovka. Before launching the assault, they covered the village with 120mm mortars. Eventually, according to Russian reports, Martinovka was in an operational encirclement. That's when part of the Ukrainian garrison tried to break out of the encirclement under the cover of darkness. One column of 8 vehicles actually managed to reach Sudzha, but when they got there, the bridge was gone. While they were deciding on how to cross the river, they were spotted by enemy drones. Moments later, Russian MRLS systems fired at the column and destroyed the vehicles one by one. In the end, drones joined the fireworks and finished the job. The destruction in one time of such a large column of the Ukrainian armed forces had not happened in a very long time. By the way, as you can see, a number of strategic bridges around Sudzha had been destroyed, greatly reducing possible retreat roads. It was most likely the result of Russian airstrikes, but some people claim that it was the Ukrainians that blew up the bridges when they heard about this pipeline attack, and essentially prevent this attack force from crossing to the other side. There was also this other bridge, 1 kilometer west of Loknia. A Ukrainian convoy tried to retreat, and the moment they crossed over the bridge, GG well played, it detonated. And you know the Russians, when in doubt, they double tap. By the end of March 8, the situation turned into a real nightmare for Ukraine. Their defensive perimeter had contracted by 4 kilometers, and entire sabotage groups had taken a foothold inside Sudzha. The success of the Russian command laid in the synchronicity of a large number of forces. These simultaneous attacks caused a rapid fragmentation of the Ukrainian defensive perimeter, followed by the withdrawal of Ukrainian forces from entire settlements that they just abandoned, and more often than not, without the approval of the General Staff of Ukraine. In other words, Ukraine faced a real debacle. The 9th and 10th of March. Throughout the night, fighting continued across the urban area of Sudzha. Russian artillery crews worked all night to keep the momentum going, and eliminated the remaining enemy strongholds. At the same time, drone swarms hunted down the retreating Ukrainian columns trying to escape encirclements. Like these fiber optics drones waiting at a crossroad to strike the approaching vehicles. Can you imagine that? All this destruction because of guys like him. During the night, the last remnants of the Ukrainian garrison of Martinovka fled towards Sudzha. In the morning, fighters of the 14th, 34th Akhmat Chechnya Regiment raised their banner on the settlement. A great victory, especially after they tried to capture this village for 6 months. The cleanup of the neighboring Cherkasskoye Parechnoye was also underway, as some Ukrainian forces were still present there in isolated areas. But during the night, the majority of the defenders ran away to avoid being encircled and captured. In this footage, a group of stragglers surrendered to Akhmat fighters in Cherkasskoye Parechnoye, thus confirming the complete fall of the settlement. It's not a surprise due to the breakdown of command and control. Entire groups of Ukrainian soldiers suddenly found themselves surrounded by the enemy and left with no other choice but to go through a chaotic withdrawal. and as always, some of the stragglers just couldn't keep up. By noon, reports came that Ukrainian forces were caught in a cauldron in Malaya Lokhnia. Due to the proximity of Russian troops and their drone coverage, a coordinated withdrawal was no longer possible. Ukrainian formations had to retreat in small groups to avoid being detected. It was also dramatic that many of them were men of the 95th Air Assault or 47th Mechanized Brigades, some of Ukraine's best troops. Now the best they could do was fight rearguard battles to protect the withdrawal of the entire battle group. The Russians played the clock, and when all the defenders had scattered, men of the 34th Motor Rifle Brigade and 9th Motor Rifle Regiment entered the village of Malaya Lokhnia. Here we can recognize the flag of the city of Sochi of the Krasnodar region, as well as the white flag of Saruman from Lord of the Rings. You can say whatever you think about these guys, they have a good sense of humor. They have fully accepted the role of the bad guys. With a crumbling front, Kazachia Lokhnia was one of the only remaining strongholds for Ukraine. That's how the Eye of Sauron turned its FAB bombs in this direction. Settlements were falling one after the other. The entire defensive perimeter was collapsing from the inside. Entire armored columns got annihilated as they tried to flee. That's how some Canadian-made senators of the 128th Mountain Brigade were destroyed by Russian forepost UAVs. This started a snowball effect. The remnants of Ukrainian forces carried a hasty retreat towards Sudzha, and from there towards the Ukrainian border. It was a real rout. Most of them had no other choice but to go on foot, because the roads leading westwards were littered with burnt down vehicles. As you can see in this footage, Ukrainian soldiers are running across the very symbolic border checkpoint separating Russia and Ukraine.
We are winning!
At dawn on the 10th of March, small groups aboard armored vehicles attached to the Aidar and 93rd Mechanized Brigade attempted a counterattack, but they were soon stopped by waves of enemy drones. Kazachia Lokhnia was now in the crosshairs of the Russian army. The next door village of Zazulevka was captured by the Akhmat Special Forces and soldiers of the 155th Marine Brigade. There, the pipe stretchers chased out the defenders, firing RPGs at the enemy during a battle that lasted until sunset. Further south, Russian forces now approached the village of Ruskaya Konopelka, and in preparation of the attack, launched numerous waves of drone strikes. The garrison quickly fled when the first troops of the 186th Regiment showed up. This is all the equipment that the Ukrainians left behind. Ukrainian bloggers suggested that the withdrawal was chaotic, and at best, poorly coordinated. Here in the BBC, one Ukrainian soldier said, supply routes had been cut, logistics no longer work, organized deliveries of weapons, ammunition, food and water are no longer possible. Anton said he managed to leave Sudzha by foot at night. Drones are in the sky all the time.
A great success!
It also appears that the initial decision to withdraw was made by local commanders and their troops themselves as the situation around them worsened. Only then did the Ukrainian command staff in Kursk react, after the withdrawal of all their forces was already in motion. In other words, once again, the definition of a debacle. A mostly peaceful debacle, okay? 11th to the 13th of March. By the 11th of March, the salient had once again contracted, but this time by almost 6 kilometers. The Ukrainian army had not witnessed such a disaster in a long time. There was also this video that went viral, showing an entire column, dozens upon dozens of Ukrainian soldiers with their hands in the air, surrendering to the Russians, as proof of their defeat in Kursk Oblast. However, fake news, I remember using this exact footage in 2022, since this was actually recorded during the siege of Mariupol. By that point, the Ukrainian front line was essentially just the town of Sudzha and Kazachia Lokhnia. Russian forces mostly entered settlements that had already been abandoned by the enemy. The pipeline attack force even came across well-fortified positions on the outskirts of Sudzha, clearly demonstrating that the Ukrainian command had the intention of defending the town. But everything collapsed so rapidly that all the troops were just called back to the other side of the river. Here you can see a Russian soldier photographed at the gates of Sudzha. Meanwhile, other detachments advanced quickly across swamps and forested areas before gaining a foothold in the eastern outskirts of Sudzha. From this moment on, we also don't really know what happened to this pipeline attack force. Just like partisans, they became a nuisance behind the enemy lines, and mostly played a psychological role, making the enemy believe that all positions had collapsed. From there, the men of Operation Pipeline just waited for the arrival of friendly units. That's when Russian units of the 11th Air Assault Brigade pushed from Ulyanok towards Sudzha and stormed the village of Pondarivka. As they raised their flag, friendly drones chased after the remnants of the Ukrainian Defense Force. Meanwhile, another assault detachment pushed along the Psil River. That's how the Russians captured the settlements of Zamosti and Makhnovka. A couple hours before, right at the same exact location, you can see Ukrainian soldiers running away from the settlement. Even inside Sudzha, withdrawing using vehicles became dangerous, so the majority of Ukrainian infantrymen simply fled by foot. That's also when the 47th Mechanized Brigade fell back on Kazachya Loknya. They defended it against multiple Russian assault columns, but soon they were forced to fall back from there as well. With all these withdrawing columns heading towards the border, Russian drone operators prepared this very nasty ambush. Instead of just flying around, their FPV drones would lay low right above the ground and wait for the vehicles to pass by before chasing them down. With this debacle in full motion, the Russians tried to outflank the Ukrainian withdrawal with another blitz towards Basivka using quad bikes for maximum speed, but allegedly the attempt failed and the attack force scattered. On the 12th of March, another 4-kilometer withdrawal. Kazachya Loknya was abandoned, and the Ukrainians only maintained their positions in the western outskirts of Sudzha. The 118th Territorial Defense Brigade was fighting rearguard battles, waiting for the rearguard elements and the remnants of the Ukrainian army to catch up with them. Eventually, forward elements of the 11th Airborne Brigade, the 106th Tula Airborne Division, and the 30th Motor Rifle Regiment made a successful push inside Mirny, the eastern suburb of Sudzha, thus linking up with the pipeline attack force. We can see all the flags they displayed for this special moment. After that, the main Russian attack force crossed the river and started occupying the city center of Sudzha. That's when paratroopers of the 11th Brigade and special forces of the 2nd Brigade raised their flags in Sudzha, a city under enemy occupation for 215 days. Although on the map it's easy to just draw red arrows going towards Sudzha, when you zoom in, you see the struggle of the individual soldier. For example, in this footage, you can see a storm detachment of the Kursk Vitazi battalion of the Piatnashka Brigade mopping up the city, street by street, house by house. It's a very dangerous job. The enemy could wait for you at any corner. That's when the battalion commander of this unit, Ivan Krutikov, fell in one of these firefights as he was leading from the front. In the end, you can see this Russian recon drone recording the road going from Sudzha to the Ukrainian border. It's littered with destroyed and burnt down vehicles. What a disaster. For Ukraine, it was over. GG, well played. A bit like your drunk uncle at the casino. Within a week, the Ukrainians had lost all their chips.
You don't have the cards right now.
By the 13th of March, the Ukrainians had abandoned most of Sudzha as they fell back towards Goncharovka, before being forced to retreat from there as well. That same day, Russian war reporters also visited the site of this Ukrainian column that got destroyed next to the bridge.
Мост разрушили, противник этого не ожидал, и они попали в ловушку.
Between the 15th and the 16th of March, the Russian army cleared the suburbs of Goncharovka and Rubanchina. 24 hours later, by the 17th, they attacked in the south and recaptured the village of Gueva. At this rate, it's just a matter of time before they push back the Ukrainians all the way across the border. And you know it's serious and very personal when Putin shows up to the front, in uniform. In conclusion, this was perhaps one of the most brilliantly led and decisive military operations of the Russian army of the entire war. Not only were all the attacks perfectly coordinated, but they also included all the elements of modern warfare. As a result, the Ukrainian battle group in Kursk Oblast fled, leaving many of their vehicles behind. With that being said, despite this Ukrainian debacle, many Russian war reporters were disappointed that no real encirclement of Ukrainian forces was achieved. For the most part, the Ukrainians retreated from their positions right before being surrounded. For example, there haven't been as many prisoners of war as one could have expected. A couple dozens at best, maybe 50, considering that nearly 10,000 Ukrainians were trapped in the salient. And thus this also debunks the statements by President Trump about Ukrainian troops being encircled. With all the footage available, Russian war reporters also noticed that the Ukrainians only lost some troops and light vehicles during their retreat. But for the most part, they were able to preserve their main forces, such as their armor and the integrity of their formations. Once again, it's not me saying it, it's Russian war reporters, but I have to agree, what they say is factually correct. From all the footage we saw, most vehicles left behind were civilian ones, MRAPs, and some towed howitzers. All the other vehicles that were recorded as being destroyed, I remember them being burnt down a couple months ago. It's from past battles. Anyway, the big question now is, what can we expect next? Well, after 7 months of fighting, both sides must be exhausted. They need time to rest and replenish their forces. Option 1 for the Russian armed forces would be to continue their momentum and push towards Sumy Oblast. The problem is that the city of Sumy is surrounded by dense forested areas, which greatly favor the defender since it cancels out Russian firepower. As a matter of fact, the Russians remember this very clearly from 2022. And like we have seen in Kremina and Sinkivka, progression in forested areas is very difficult for Russian forces. So the most likely scenario is that the Russian army will continue to push, grab some land in Sumy Oblast as a buffer zone. But overall, that's it. Now as for option 2, we can expect the Russian battle group Kursk to be shifted towards the Donbass to support the effort in other directions such as Pokrovsk, Chasiv Yar, Tarietsk, anywhere really, and just increase the pressure on the Ukrainian army. However, if I was playing Team Red, I would reposition some of the forces right here, north of Veliki Borluk and near Vovchansk. From there, have them just crush Ukrainian lines in Kharkiv Oblast in a wide flanking maneuver in support of the Oskol River offensive. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The links are in the description below.